The chemo pump beeped steadily beside Eleanor Sterling's hospital bed. Rebecca counted each mechanical breath, while her mother-in-law dozed between waves of nausea. 8 months pregnant, Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair she'd claimed as her own for the past 6 months. The oncology ward smelled like disinfectant and hope mixed with despair. Rebecca had memorized every sound, the whispered conversations between families, the soft squeaking of nurses' shoes on linoleum, the endless beeping of machines keeping time with fragile lives. "Mrs. Sterling?" A man in a cheap suit appeared in the doorway. "I need Rebecca Mitchell Sterling to sign for a delivery." Rebecca's hand went instinctively to her rounded belly. The baby kicked as if sensing tension. "I'm Rebecca Sterling. Legal documents. You need to sign here." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open as Rebecca accepted the manila envelope. Her paper-thin fingers, bruised from IV needles, gripped the hospital bed's safety rail. "What is it, dear?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Rebecca's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. Divorce papers. Her name typed in black letters across legal documents that would destroy everything she'd built over the past 5 years. "Mrs. Sterling," the process server continued, "I also need Eleanor Grace Sterling to witness these proceedings." Eleanor struggled to sit up straighter. "What proceedings?" Rebecca couldn't speak. The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. She stared at the papers, reading the same horrible sentence over and over. Petitioner requests dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. Immediate custody determination required. "Your son is divorcing me," Rebecca finally managed. "He wants you to witness it." The silence stretched between them. Eleanor's oxygen concentrator hummed its mechanical rhythm. Down the hall, someone's family was crying. Eleanor's face went through emotions like a slideshow. Confusion, understanding, horror. He wouldn't dare, but he had. The papers demanded Eleanor's presence at divorce proceedings in 5 days. Stage 3 ovarian cancer, aggressive chemotherapy treatment every 2 weeks, and her son wanted her to watch him destroy the woman who'd become her lifeline. Rebecca checked her phone. 3 times. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. The text from Marcus's lawyer kept coming like digital daggers. Urgent, time-sensitive, legal requirements. "There's more, isn't there?" Eleanor whispered. Rebecca nodded, turning to page 3. Her vision blurred as she read the custody demands. Marcus was seeking full custody of their unborn child. He claimed Rebecca was emotionally unstable, obsessively focused on his mother's care to the detriment of their marriage. "I'm not imagining this cruelty," Rebecca said aloud. "This is really happening." Eleanor reached for Rebecca's hand. Her grip was weak but fierce. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Rebecca looked around the oncology ward. Families fighting cancer together, supporting each other through the worst moments of their lives. She thought about Marcus, who hadn't stepped foot in this hospital in 3 weeks. "It started with the phone calls," Rebecca said. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Victoria Ashford." Rebecca's head snapped up. "You know? I'm dying, not blind," Eleanor said softly. "I've known about her for months." The process server cleared his throat. "I need signatures confirming delivery." Rebecca signed with numb fingers. The man disappeared as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving behind the legal papers that would reshape their lives. Eleanor pressed the button to raise her hospital bed. "Now tell me about Victoria." Rebecca had been protecting everyone except herself for so long. The truth felt foreign on her tongue. "She calls him after midnight. Business meetings that run until 3 in the morning. Hotel charges on his credit card. And you said nothing?" What was I supposed to say? Accuse him while you're fighting cancer? Seem jealous and paranoid while you need the stability? Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Oh, my dear girl, you've been holding this burden alone." The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if protesting the stress flooding her system. Rebecca rubbed her belly absently, a gesture that had become automatic over the past 8 months. "I thought if I was perfect," Rebecca continued, "if I took care of you without complaint, if I never asked for anything, I thought he'd remember why he married me." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "And instead he decided to throw you away like garbage." The words hung in the antiseptic air. Rebecca felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart breaking, but a wall she'd built around the truth finally crumbling. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus." "Are you going to answer?" Eleanor asked. Rebecca stared at his name on the screen. "No, I'm done pretending everything is fine." Eleanor smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good. Now we need to plan." Dr. Sarah Coleman arrived with Eleanor's latest test results at exactly 3:15. Rebecca had learned to read the oncologist's face like a weather map. Today showed cautious optimism mixed with realistic concern. The tumor markers are stable, Dr. Coleman said, settling into the chair beside Eleanor's bed. The chemotherapy is working, but slowly. How slowly, Eleanor asked. 6 to 12 months with aggressive treatment, possibly longer if we're lucky. Rebecca felt relief and terror in equal measure. More time with Eleanor, but more time watching her fade. More time for Marcus to manipulate the situation. Where's Marcus today? Dr. Coleman asked, looking around the room. Rebecca had stopped making excuses months ago. Business trip. Eleanor's knowing look said everything. In 6 months of treatment, Marcus had attended one appointment. One. He'd spent 15 minutes asking about insurance coverage and left when Dr. Coleman started explaining side effects. Rebecca, honey, you need rest, Dr. Coleman said, studying Rebecca's face with professional concern. This stress isn't good for the baby. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. Victoria Ashford calling, the name that had become a constant reminder of her husband's betrayal. Dr. Coleman noticed Rebecca's expression. Bad news? My husband's mistress, Rebecca said simply. The words felt strange, spoken aloud. She'd been thinking them for months but never voiced them. Dr. Coleman's eyebrows rose, but she maintained professional composure. I see. Is there family support available? During treatment, caregivers need care too. Eleanor spoke up. She's been doing this alone. My son has apparently found other priorities. After Dr. Coleman left, Eleanor turned to Rebecca with fierce determination. Tell me about Victoria, everything you know. Rebecca pulled out her phone and scrolled through months of evidence she'd been too afraid to confront. She works at Hartwell and Associates. Corporate law. They've been having meetings that last until midnight. She showed Eleanor the credit card statements she'd discovered buried in Marcus's desk. 5-star restaurants, hotel suites, business expenses that coincided perfectly with Rebecca's overnight stays at the hospital. $12,000 at the Ritz-Carlton, Rebecca read. Same week you had surgery. I was sleeping on a cot beside your bed while he was destroying his marriage, Eleanor finished. Rebecca felt the panic-cleaning urge hit her like a tidal wave. At 2 in the morning, she'd found herself reorganizing Eleanor's entire medication schedule, sorting pills by color, then by size, then alphabetically. Anything to keep her hands busy while her mind raced. Eleanor had found her in the kitchen that night, surrounded by pill bottles and printed schedules. Talk to me, Eleanor had said. I can't stop my brain, Rebecca had admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see them together. I imagine conversations they're having about me, about how pathetic I am. You're not pathetic, you're loyal. There's a difference. Now, sitting in the hospital room with divorce papers between them, Rebecca understood what Eleanor meant. Loyalty wasn't weakness, but it could be exploited by weak people. Her phone rang. Marcus. Eleanor watched Rebecca's face change. Answer it, but put it on speaker. Rebecca hesitated, then accepted the call. Hello, Marcus. Mom told me about the papers, Marcus said without preamble. I need you both to understand the situation. Eleanor's voice cut through the speaker like ice. The situation is that you had divorce papers served during my chemotherapy treatment. Now's not the time for drama, Mom. I need you to witness these proceedings because you're a coward who wants to use his dying mother to legitimize his cruelty. The line went quiet. Rebecca could picture Marcus's face, the way his jaw tightened when challenged. She'd seen that expression countless times directed at her. This marriage was over long before your diagnosis, Marcus said finally. Rebecca became obsessed with your care. She has no time for our relationship. Eleanor's laugh was sharp. She became obsessed with my care because my own son abandoned me. I didn't abandon anyone. I have responsibilities, a company to run, and a mistress to maintain, Eleanor added sweetly. Another silence, longer this time. I don't know what Rebecca's told you, but Eleanor hung up. Rebecca stared at the phone. I've never heard you talk to him like that. I've been protecting his feelings while he destroyed yours. That ends today. Eleanor pulled out her own phone and began scrolling through messages. I've been watching, Rebecca, gathering information. Oh, mother knows when her child is becoming a monster. She turned the screen toward Rebecca. Screenshots of credit card statements, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, all documented with dates and amounts. You've been collecting evidence? For 3 months. Ever since I realized what he was doing to you. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, but the absence of complete despair. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to figure it out yourself. And because I was building a case, Eleanor's fingers moved across her phone screen with surprising speed for someone weakened by chemotherapy. Victoria Ashford, Esquire, graduated law school 5 years ago, specializes in corporate takeovers. She paused, looking directly at Rebecca. Ironic, isn't it? She specializes in hostile takeovers. I've been protecting everyone except myself, Rebecca said quietly. Eleanor reached for her hand. That changes today. We're going to protect you now. The afternoon light slanted through the hospital room windows, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. Rebecca felt the baby move inside her, a flutter of life in the midst of so much uncertainty. What do we do now? Rebecca asked. Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Now we fight back. The sound of Marcus's BMW in Eleanor's driveway cut through the evening quiet like a warning. Rebecca felt her stomach clench as she helped Eleanor from the car to her wheelchair. The discharge from the hospital had taken longer than expected, and Eleanor was exhausted from the day's treatment. He's early, Rebecca murmured, checking the time on her phone. 6:30. Marcus never came home before 8 anymore. Eleanor's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests. He's here about the papers. He wants to control the narrative. Rebecca unlocked the front door to the house she'd called home for 5 years. Everything looked the same. The family photos on the mantel, the throw pillows she'd chosen to match the autumn colors, the life she'd built one careful decision at a time. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, still wearing his business suit. He looked like a magazine advertisement for success. Tall, confident, expensive. Rebecca remembered when that look made her feel proud to be his wife. Mom needs to understand the situation, he announced without greeting either of them. Eleanor transferred from the wheelchair to her recliner with Rebecca's help. The oxygen tank hummed beside her chair, a constant reminder of her body's rebellion against her will. Explain it to me, son, Eleanor said, settling back with the dignity of a queen holding court. Marcus launched into what sounded like a rehearsed presentation. Rebecca was emotionally unstable. The pregnancy was poorly timed. He needed a partner who understood his career demands. The words washed over Rebecca like cold water. Like Victoria? Eleanor's voice remained steady. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. How do you know about Victoria? I'm dying, not blind. The room fell silent except for the oxygen concentrator's mechanical breathing. Rebecca watched her husband's face cycle through emotions. Surprise, calculation, defensive anger. Mom, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. Eleanor pulled out her phone. The screenshots she'd been collecting appeared on the screen one by one. $12,000. The Ritz-Carlton. Business expense? She read from Marcus's credit card statement with the precision of a prosecutor. Same dates Rebecca was here with me during my surgery recovery. Marcus's face went pale. Mom, those are private financial. 5-star restaurants, hotel suites, Victoria Ashford, Esquire. All while your pregnant wife slept on a cot beside my hospital bed. Rebecca felt the world tilt slightly. Eleanor had known everything, had been watching, protecting her while gathering evidence of Marcus's betrayal. The marriage was already over, Marcus said, his voice taking on the edge Rebecca knew meant he was cornered. Rebecca and I haven't been compatible since your diagnosis. She's obsessed with your care. Eleanor's question cut through his excuses like a scalpel. Since when? Since she became more invested in playing nurse than being my wife. The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. She'd been caring for his mother, the woman who raised him, who loved him unconditionally despite his growing selfishness. She has no time for our relationship, Marcus continued. Every conversation is about medications and doctor appointments. Every plan gets canceled for your needs. Eleanor's oxygen concentrator hummed through another long silence. Rebecca felt the baby kick, as if responding to the tension in the room. Get out of my house, Eleanor said quietly. Marcus blinked. Mom, get out and take your divorce papers with you. You don't understand. I need you to witness the proceedings because you want to use your dying mother to legitimize abandoning your pregnant wife? Eleanor's voice remained calm, but her eyes blazed. I understand perfectly. Marcus tried a different approach. This is what's best for everyone. Rebecca will be happier with someone who can appreciate her nursing instincts. I need a partner who understands business. You need a partner who doesn't mind being lied to, Eleanor corrected. Rebecca found herself sitting in the bathtub fully clothed at 11 that night. The water was cold around her, but she couldn't bring herself to get out. She kept replaying Marcus's words. Obsessed with care. No time for their relationship. Emotionally unstable. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had lost herself in Eleanor's illness. Maybe a better wife would have found balance between caring for a dying woman and maintaining her husband's interest. Eleanor knocked softly on the bathroom door. Rebecca, can I come in? I'm fine, Rebecca lied. No, you're not, and that's okay. Eleanor entered using her walker, moving slowly but with determination. She lowered herself onto the toilet seat with a soft groan. He's good at this, Eleanor said, making you question reality. His father did the same thing to me for 20 years. Rebecca looked up. Marcus's father was nothing like this. James was charming, successful, everyone loved him. But behind closed doors, he made me feel crazy for having needs, selfish for wanting attention, paranoid for noticing his affairs. Eleanor reached over and turned off the cold water faucet Rebecca hadn't realized was still running. The difference is, I believed him. I spent 20 years apologizing for existing. You're stronger than I was. I don't feel strong. Strong people rarely do. They're too busy carrying everyone else's weight. Eleanor's words settled over Rebecca like a warm blanket. Not comfort exactly, but understanding. Recognition. He said, I'm obsessed with your care. You're devoted to my care. There's a difference. Eleanor's voice was firm. Obsession is unhealthy. Devotion is love. Rebecca finally climbed out of the bathtub, water dripping from her clothes onto the bathroom tiles. Eleanor handed her a towel without judgment. What happens now? Rebecca asked. Eleanor's smile was sharp with purpose. Now we show him what real strength looks like. The next morning brought another delivery. This time, Rebecca was ready. She signed for the envelope without trembling hands and read the contents with Eleanor beside her. Court date set for the following Tuesday. Eleanor Grace Sterling required to appear as witness. Despite medical condition, despite ongoing treatment. He's really going to make you go to court, Rebecca said. Eleanor was already reaching for her phone. Not if I make some calls first. Rebecca watched her mother-in-law transform from fragile cancer patient to strategic businesswoman. Before Marcus was born, Eleanor had been a corporate executive. That sharp mind was still there, hidden beneath months of illness and medication. Judge Patricia Hawthorne, Eleanor said after her third phone call. I know her mother. This should be interesting. Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as powerless as Marcus wanted her to believe. Eleanor, Rebecca asked, what you said about Marcus's father, about the affairs, does Marcus know? Eleanor's expression grew sad. Marcus thinks his father was perfect. I never told him the truth. I thought I was protecting him. But now I wonder if protecting him from his father's failures turned him into his father. The afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like possibilities. Rebecca felt the baby move inside her, a reminder that this fight wasn't just about her anymore. We're going to win this, Eleanor said with quiet certainty. Rebecca wanted to believe her. For the first time in months, she thought maybe she could. Eleanor's energy seemed to return with purpose, as if having a battle to fight had reminded her body what it was fighting for. She'd spent the morning in her home office, a room Rebecca had barely seen her use since the diagnosis. Come here, Eleanor called. I want to show you something. Rebecca found Eleanor surrounded by papers, her laptop open, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked more like the corporate executive she'd once been than the fragile patient from the hospital. First, we document everything, Eleanor said, spreading files across her desk. Your care of me, his absence, the financial infidelity. Rebecca protested weakly. Eleanor, you need to rest. The chemotherapy can wait. Right now, I need to protect you and my grandchild. Rest can come later. Eleanor had been busy. Medical records showing Rebecca's presence at every appointment. Photos Rebecca didn't even remember being taken of her sleeping beside Eleanor's hospital bed. Credit card statements Eleanor had quietly been copying for months. Why didn't you tell me you knew? Rebecca asked, sinking into the chair beside Eleanor's desk. Eleanor's smile was sad but determined. Because you needed to figure it out yourself, and because I was gathering ammunition. Rebecca looked through the evidence Eleanor had compiled. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, phone records showing late-night calls between Marcus and Victoria, a paper trail of betrayal documented with business-like precision. You've been planning this for months. I've been watching my son destroy the best thing in his life while his wife sacrificed everything for his family. Yes, I've been planning. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. Rebecca recognized her mother's voice in the hallway before Diana Mitchell appeared in the office doorway, carrying grocery bags and wearing an expression of barely contained fury. "I brought lunch," Diana announced, "and a few things I've been wanting to say." Diana had been biting her tongue about Marcus since the engagement 5 years ago. She'd smiled through the wedding, welcomed him into their family, and kept her concerns to herself. But seeing her pregnant daughter's hollow eyes had apparently broken her silence. "I never liked him," Diana said, unpacking sandwiches with the efficiency of a woman accustomed to feeding people in crisis. "But I bit my tongue because you loved him." Eleanor laughed, a sound Rebecca hadn't heard in weeks. "I like your mother. A man who leaves his pregnant wife to care for his dying mother while he runs around with his secretary?" Diana continued. "That's not a man. That's a parasite." Rebecca felt the strange urge to defend Marcus, even now. The instinct to smooth things over, make excuses, keep peace. She caught herself before the words came out. "I know what you're thinking," Diana said, studying Rebecca's face. "You want to make excuses for him. I did the same thing with your father." Rebecca looked up sharply. Her parents had divorced when she was 12, but she'd never heard the real story. "Your father was charming too. Successful. Everyone thought I was lucky to have him." Diana's voice grew quiet. "But charm doesn't keep you warm at night when he's working late with his assistant." Eleanor reached over and squeezed Diana's hand. "How long did you stay?" "Too long. I thought if I was perfect enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, he'd choose me over whatever was pulling him away." The three women sat in Eleanor's office. 3 generations of female experience with male betrayal. Rebecca felt less alone than she had in months. "The difference is," Diana continued, "you have evidence. You have support. You have options I didn't have." At 3 in the morning, Rebecca found herself researching divorce law on her laptop. Eleanor was sleeping, finally worn out from their day of strategic planning. The house was quiet except for the oxygen concentrator's steady rhythm from the next room. Divorce during pregnancy, rights of caregivers, financial infidelity in marriage. The search terms felt surreal, like she was researching someone else's life. Her phone rang. Victoria Ashford. Rebecca stared at the name on the screen, then answered. "Hello, Victoria." "Rebecca, I didn't expect you to answer." Victoria's voice sounded different than Rebecca had imagined. Younger, less confident than her professional reputation suggested. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you. In person. There are things you should know about Marcus, about what he's planning." Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of things?" "Not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow? I know you have no reason to trust me, but..." "You're right, I don't. Please, what Marcus is doing to you, to his mother, it's not what I signed up for." Rebecca looked toward Eleanor's room, where the woman who'd become more of a mother to her than a mother-in-law lay fighting for every breath. "Fine, tomorrow, 2 o'clock. The coffee shop on 5th Street. "Thank you." After hanging up, Rebecca sat in the dark living room, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. But Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. "We gather information, we document everything, we fight smart." Maybe Victoria Ashford had information they needed. Rebecca fell asleep on the couch, her laptop still open to articles about divorce proceedings. She dreamed of courtrooms and hospital beds, of legal documents that dissolved marriages like chemotherapy dissolved cancer cells. When she woke at dawn, Eleanor was standing in the doorway in her robe, oxygen tank trailing behind her. "You stayed up all night researching," Eleanor observed. "I needed to understand what we're facing." Eleanor moved slowly to her recliner, settling with careful movements. "And what did you learn?" "That Marcus has advantages. Money, lawyers, the presumption that successful businessmen make good fathers." "And what advantages do we have?" Rebecca looked at the evidence spread across Eleanor's desk. The documentation of care and abandonment, the financial records of betrayal, the simple truth of what had happened. "We have the truth." Eleanor smiled. "Truth is powerful, but we need to be smarter than Marcus expects." Rebecca told Eleanor about Victoria's call. Eleanor listened without judgment, her business mind working through possibilities. "She wants to meet," Rebecca finished. "Interesting. Either she's feeling guilty or Marcus is planning something worse than we know." "Should I go?" Eleanor considered this. "Yes, but not alone and not without preparation." The morning light filled the living room slowly, illuminating the battle plans scattered across every surface. Rebecca felt the baby move inside her, a reminder of everything at stake. "Every instinct I had was right," Rebecca said quietly. "I'm not crazy. Eleanor reached for her hand. You were never crazy, dear. You were just married to someone who wanted you to think you were. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain as Rebecca helped Eleanor from the wheelchair to the walker. 2 days after their meeting with Victoria Ashford, they were facing the reality Marcus had forced upon them. Eleanor was required to appear in court, despite her condition, to witness proceedings that would tear apart her family. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises. Rebecca had never been inside a family court before. The formal atmosphere felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. Marcus sat at a table with two lawyers, looking confident and composed. His lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Margaret Chen, had a reputation for winning ugly custody battles. Eleanor moved slowly to the witness section, her oxygen tank creating a soft mechanical rhythm that seemed to emphasize the absurdity of forcing a cancer patient to attend divorce proceedings. Your Honor, Margaret Chen began, my client seeks dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences and requests full custody of the unborn child due to concerns about the respondent's mental stability. Rebecca's lawyer, Catherine Mills, was a fierce woman in her 50s who specialized in protecting women's rights. She'd taken one look at Eleanor's condition and Marcus's demands and agreed to represent Rebecca pro bono. Mrs. Sterling has become obsessively focused on her mother-in-law's care to the detriment of her marriage and her own well-being, Margaret Chen continued. She's been sleeping at the hospital instead of at home. She's neglected her husband's needs during a critical time in his career. Rebecca felt each word like a physical blow. They were taking her devotion to Eleanor and twisting it into evidence of mental instability. Catherine Mills rose slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence of Mr. Sterling's definition of marriage commitment. She opened a folder and began laying out hotel receipts, restaurant bills, credit card statements showing expensive dinners for two, while Rebecca sat beside Eleanor's hospital bed, eating cafeteria sandwiches. While Mrs. Sterling was providing round-the-clock care for his dying mother, Mr. Sterling was conducting an affair with Victoria Ashford, a corporate lawyer from a rival firm. Margaret Chen objected. Your Honor, my client's private relationships are not relevant to custody determination. They are when they demonstrate abandonment of family responsibility, Catherine interrupted. Judge Hawthorne studied the evidence with growing displeasure. Mr. Sterling, is it true you've attended only one of your mother's medical appointments in 6 months? Marcus stood, projecting the confidence that had once made Rebecca feel protected. Your Honor, I have a company to run. I employ over 200 people. I trusted my wife to handle my mother's care while I maintained our financial stability. By having an affair? Judge Hawthorne's voice was ice. My marriage was already failing due to my wife's obsessive focus on my mother's condition. I sought companionship elsewhere, yes, but that doesn't make me an unfit father. Eleanor asked to address the court. The bailiff helped her stand, her walker supporting her fragile frame. Your Honor, my son wants custody of a child he's already abandoned. Eleanor's voice was weak but clear. He claims Rebecca is unfit because she cared for me during cancer treatment, the same treatment he's attended once in 6 months. Eleanor's words grew stronger as she continued. I'm dying. I won't see this grandchild grow up. But I'll be damned if I let my son take this baby from the only parent who understands what family really means. The courtroom fell silent. Rebecca watched Marcus's face cycle through emotions. Shock at his mother's public condemnation, anger at losing control of the narrative, something that might have been shame, quickly buried. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, I want the court to know that Rebecca has been my primary caregiver without compensation, without complaint, and without support from my son. She slept beside my hospital bed for months while my son slept in hotel rooms with his mistress. Margaret Chen tried to object, but Judge Hawthorne silenced her with a look. Mrs. Sterling, are you saying your son has provided no support during your treatment? Financial support, yes. Emotional support, no. Physical presence, no. Rebecca has been my lifeline while my son has been planning to discard her like trash. Eleanor's legs gave out. The bailiff caught her as she collapsed, her oxygen tank clattering against the walker. Recess, Judge Hawthorne called. Get medical assistance now. The courtroom erupted in controlled chaos. Paramedics arrived within minutes, checking Eleanor's vital signs while Rebecca knelt beside her, holding her hand. I'm okay, Eleanor whispered, and just tired. But she wasn't okay. The stress of the proceedings, combined with her weakened condition, had pushed her body past its limits. Marcus approached as the paramedics prepared to transport Eleanor to the hospital. Mom, I'm sorry. I never wanted... Eleanor looked at her son with eyes full of disappointment. Yes, you did. You wanted exactly this. You wanted to use my illness to legitimize your cruelty. Rebecca rode in the ambulance, holding Eleanor's hand while monitors tracked her failing systems. Outside the hospital, she found Victoria Ashford waiting in the parking lot. I heard what happened in court, Victoria said quietly. Rebecca felt too drained for anger. What do you want? To help, to make this right somehow. They sat in the hospital chapel, surrounded by stained glass and the weight of desperate prayers. Victoria looked younger than her professional photos, more uncertain. I didn't know, Victoria said, about your pregnancy when it started. Marcus said you were separated. He said his mother was doing well. That family was helping with her care. Rebecca waited, too tired to fill the silence. By family, he meant you. Always you. While he told me he was trapped in a loveless marriage with someone who didn't understand his ambitions. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. I'm a corporate lawyer. I specialize in hostile takeovers. I thought I was helping him escape an unhappy situation, not destroying a family. Victoria pulled out a folder. But after seeing your mother-in-law in court today, seeing what you've sacrificed, I realize I'm not taking a husband from an unhappy wife. I'm helping destroy a family that was functioning until I came along. She handed Rebecca the folder. Marcus has been moving money, offshore accounts, shell companies. He's planning to hide assets before the divorce is final. Rebecca stared at the financial documents. Account numbers, transfer records, patterns of deception that went beyond infidelity into financial fraud. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to be the kind of person who destroys families. And because your mother-in-law is right, you're the only real parent this baby will have. Eleanor woke up in the hospital room to find Rebecca and Victoria discussing legal strategy. Her eyes moved between them with sharp intelligence, despite her weakened state. This is unexpected, Eleanor said softly. Victoria approached the hospital bed carefully. Mrs. Sterling, I owe you an apology. You owe my daughter-in-law an apology. I'm dying. She has to live with the consequences of your choices. Victoria flinched at the direct words. Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to make it right. Eleanor studied Victoria with the calculating gaze of a former executive. How? Victoria explained about the hidden assets, the offshore accounts, the financial deception Marcus had been planning. Interesting, Eleanor said finally. You're better at hostile takeovers than my son expected. Outside the hospital room, Victoria sat in her car for 20 minutes before starting the engine. Rebecca watched through the window as Victoria struggled with what she'd set in motion. She's not evil, Eleanor observed from her hospital bed. No, just someone who believed a convincing liar. Eleanor reached for Rebecca's hand. Starting over feels impossible, but staying feels worse. Rebecca looked at her mother-in-law, the woman who'd become her fiercest protector when her own son had become her destroyer. What happens now? Eleanor's smile was sharp with purpose. Now we use every weapon we have. Marcus's rage was volcanic when he discovered Victoria's betrayal. Rebecca heard about it secondhand from Catherine Mills, who'd received a furious call from Margaret Chen about evidence tampering and spousal manipulation. Eleanor was home from the hospital, but visibly weaker, her collapse in court having accelerated the cancer's assault on her body. She spent most of her time in her recliner, oxygen tank humming beside her, but her mind remained sharp as a blade. He fired Victoria, Rebecca reported after Catherine's call, and he's threatening to sue her for breach of fiduciary duty. Eleanor laughed, a sound that was part amusement and part bitter recognition. Of course he is. When Marcus feels cornered, he lashes out at everyone around him. Rebecca was 34 weeks pregnant now, her body preparing for birth while her life prepared for complete upheaval. The baby seemed to sense the tension, moving restlessly throughout the day. Marcus arrived unannounced that evening, using his key as if he still lived there. Rebecca heard his footsteps in the hallway and felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Mom, we need to talk, Marcus announced, appearing in the living room doorway. Eleanor didn't look up from the book she was reading. About what? Your plan to steal your wife's baby, your decision to hide marital assets, or your choice to force your dying mother to witness your moral bankruptcy? Marcus's composure slipped. You turned my own lawyer against me. I didn't turn anyone's son. Victoria saw who you really are, just like I finally have. Rebecca watched from the kitchen doorway as her husband and his mother faced off. Marcus looked like a stranger to her now, someone wearing her husband's face but driven by motivations she didn't recognize. You've poisoned everyone against me, Marcus continued, his voice rising. My own mother chooses my wife over her son. I choose right over wrong, love over selfishness, family over greed. Eleanor set down her book and looked at Marcus with eyes full of disappointment. I raised you better than this. You raised me to believe family comes first, but apparently that only applies when it's convenient for you. Family does come first. That's why I'm protecting Rebecca and my grandchild from what you've become. Marcus began pacing, his agitation filling the room like a toxic cloud. Rebecca found herself backing toward the kitchen, instinctively protecting her unborn child from his anger. What I've become? I'm successful. I provide for this family. I built a company from nothing while you and Rebecca played house with cancer treatments. Eleanor's voice remained calm, which seemed to infuriate Marcus further. You built a company your father started. You inherited everything you have, and I've grown it, tripled the revenue in 5 years, while neglecting the people who loved you. Success without character isn't success, Marcus. It's just expensive failure. Eleanor pulled out a document Rebecca had never seen before. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it, but her voice remained steady. Your father left you everything in his will, the company, this house, all the investments. You know this. Marcus looked confused. Yes, so what? What you don't know is that he left me a letter, to be opened only if you ever proved unworthy of his legacy. Eleanor's words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread through the room. Rebecca felt her breath catch. That's not possible, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Eleanor began reading from the letter in her late husband's handwriting. If Marcus becomes the kind of man who abandons family, who chooses greed over love, who lacks the honor that defines our name, then everything should go to charity instead. The room went silent, except for Eleanor's oxygen concentrator and Rebecca's rapid heartbeat. The will has a morality clause, Eleanor continued. Your father was very specific. Abandoning your pregnant wife during your mother's terminal illness meets his definition of moral failure. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, denial, understanding, rage. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything. You did this to yourself. I'll contest it. I'll fight you in court. You can try, but your father was thorough. He used the best lawyers in the state, and your behavior has been very public, very documented. Rebecca felt the baby move strongly, as if responding to the tension in the room. She placed both hands on her belly, a protective gesture that had become automatic. You want your inheritance? Eleanor continued. Prove you're worthy of it. Be the man your father hoped you'd become. Marcus tried every manipulation technique in his arsenal. Threats about elder abuse, promises to reconcile with Rebecca, emotional blackmail about Eleanor's limited time left. Eleanor remained unmoved through it all. The choice is yours, son, but choose quickly. I may not have much time left to see what kind of man you really are. After Marcus left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Rebecca sat beside Eleanor's chair, feeling emotionally exhausted. Will you really give away his inheritance? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. I hope I don't have to. I hope he'll remember who he used to be. And if he doesn't, then I'll know I raised a stranger, and your child will be better off without his influence. Rebecca pretended to be asleep when her phone rang at midnight, but Eleanor's gentle squeeze of her hand told her she wasn't fooling anyone. You don't have to answer, Eleanor whispered. I know, but maybe... Rebecca looked at Marcus's name on the screen, then declined the call. For the first time in 5 years of marriage, she chose not to be available when he demanded her attention. That felt different, Rebecca said. Eleanor smiled in the darkness. That felt like strength. The next morning brought news from Catherine Mills. Marcus had hired 3 new lawyers and was preparing to contest both the divorce proceedings and his father's will simultaneously. He's going nuclear, Catherine warned. This is going to get ugly. Rebecca looked at Eleanor, who was growing visibly weaker each day, and felt anger rise in her chest like a tide. Let him, Rebecca said. We have truth on our side. Eleanor reached for Rebecca's hand. And we have each other. Outside, spring was fighting to emerge despite winter's stubborn hold. Rebecca felt something similar happening inside herself. Strength growing despite the cold circumstances trying to suppress it. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible in my own marriage, Rebecca said quietly. But I was always here, always valuable. Eleanor squeezed her hand. Yes, you were. And now everyone's going to see it. Eleanor's condition deteriorated rapidly after the stress of court proceedings and family confrontation. Dr. Coleman had warned them that emotional trauma could accelerate cancer progression, but Rebecca hadn't been prepared for how quickly Eleanor would fade. "We need to move faster," Eleanor said from her hospital bed, where she'd been admitted after another collapse. "Time isn't on our side anymore." Rebecca sat beside the bed, 46 weeks pregnant and emotionally drained. The baby was due in less than a month, and everything felt like it was happening too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Victoria had become an unexpected fixture in their lives, handling legal coordination while Rebecca focused on Eleanor's care. It was surreal having the woman who'd helped destroy her marriage now working to salvage what remained. "Marcus filed a motion to have me declared mentally incompetent," Eleanor reported after Catherine Mill's latest call. "He claims the cancer has affected my judgment." Rebecca felt rage bloom in her chest. "He's using your illness against you." "Of course he is. It's what weak people do when they're losing. They attack what they perceive as vulnerability." But Eleanor wasn't vulnerable, even weakened by cancer. Her mind remained sharp, her strategic thinking intact. She'd spent the morning dictating final instructions to Catherine while Rebecca held her hand. "There's something else," Eleanor said carefully, "about the inheritance, about what your father actually left." Rebecca looked up from the pregnancy book she'd been trying to read. Eleanor's tone suggested important information was coming. "James didn't just leave Marcus the company in this house. He left him everything, but with conditions, not just the morality clause about abandoning family." Eleanor paused, gathering strength. "There's also a provision about protecting vulnerable family members. If Marcus ever harmed or abandoned a pregnant spouse or elderly parent, everything goes to charity." Rebecca felt the implications settle over her like a heavy blanket. "Marcus doesn't know about that clause. Marcus has never read the full will. He signed documents when his father died, but he trusted his lawyers to handle the details." Eleanor's smile was weak but satisfied. "James knew his son's character better than I wanted to admit. He prepared for this possibility." The baby kicked strongly, as if emphasizing the stakes involved. Rebecca rubbed her belly absently while processing Eleanor's revelation. "So if Marcus continues with the divorce and custody battle, he loses everything. The company goes to charity. This house goes to charity, all of it." Eleanor reached for Rebecca's hand with fingers that felt increasingly fragile. "But there's more. James also included a provision for you." Rebecca's eyes widened. "If Marcus abandons you during pregnancy or while you're caring for family members, you receive a substantial settlement. Enough to raise this baby comfortably, to buy a home, to never worry about money." The weight of this information felt overwhelming. Rebecca had been fighting for basic dignity, not knowing she was also fighting for financial security. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I hoped Marcus would make the right choice on his own. Because I wanted to believe my son was better than his father's worst fears." Eleanor's breathing became labored, and Rebecca called for the nurse. The cancer was winning, but Eleanor's spirit remained unbroken. "Promise me something," Eleanor whispered as the nurse adjusted her oxygen levels. "Anything. Don't let Marcus know about the full inheritance terms until after the baby is born. Let him make his choices without knowing the consequences." Rebecca understood. Eleanor wanted Marcus to reveal his true character without the influence of financial incentives. "And promise me you'll raise this child to know the difference between success and worth." Rebecca felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally spill over. "I promise." That evening, alone in Eleanor's room while she slept, Rebecca allowed herself to process the complete emotional devastation of her marriage. Not just the betrayal and abandonment, but the systematic erosion of her sense of reality. Marcus had made her question her own perceptions, her own worth, her own sanity. He'd isolated her from friends by scheduling social events during Eleanor's treatments. He'd criticized her appearance while she was exhausted from caregiving. He'd made her feel grateful for scraps of attention while he lavished affection on another woman. "The hardest part is admitting I knew all along," Rebecca said aloud to Eleanor's sleeping form. But knowing and accepting were different things. Rebecca had known Marcus was having an affair for months. She'd known he was planning to leave her. She'd known he didn't value her sacrifices. What she hadn't known was her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity to survive without him. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, and Rebecca reached for her hand instinctively. This woman had become more of a mother to her than her actual mother-in-law. Eleanor had protected her, guided her, and shown her what real love looked like. "I love you," Rebecca whispered. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. I love you too, dear, more than you know. The next morning brought devastating news. Marcus had accelerated all legal proceedings, demanding immediate custody determination and asset division. He'd also leaked information to the press about Eleanor's condition and Rebecca's emotional instability. He's trying to force a quick resolution before your mother-in-law can interfere further, Catherine explained over the phone. Rebecca looked at Eleanor, who was listening despite appearing to doze. Can he do that? He can try, but he's also exposing himself to public scrutiny. And some of that scrutiny isn't going to be favorable. Indeed, the local newspaper had picked up the story of a CEO forcing his cancer-stricken mother to witness divorce proceedings. Public opinion was not sympathetic to Marcus's position. Victoria arrived that afternoon with more financial documents and a grim expression. Marcus has been liquidating assets, she reported, converting everything to cash and moving it offshore. If we don't stop him soon, there won't be anything left to fight over. Eleanor struggled to sit up in her hospital bed. Then we stop him now. She reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed a number from memory. Judge Hawthorne, this is Eleanor Sterling. I have information about asset concealment that requires immediate court attention. Rebecca watched Eleanor marshal her remaining strength for one final battle. Not for herself, but for the grandchild she'd never see grow up and the daughter-in-law who'd become her heart. Tomorrow, Eleanor said after hanging up. We end this tomorrow. Rebecca felt the baby move restlessly inside her, as if sensing the approaching resolution. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back. Are you ready? Eleanor asked. Rebecca looked at this woman who taught her the difference between loyalty and doormat behavior, between love and enabling, between strength and stubbornness. Yes, Rebecca said, I'm ready. Eleanor insisted on attending the emergency court hearing, despite Dr. Coleman's strong objections. She arrived in a wheelchair, oxygen tank trailing behind her, looking like a fragile bird but projecting the authority of a queen. Your Honor, Catherine Mills began, we have evidence of systematic asset concealment and financial fraud. Victoria Ashford sat in the gallery, no longer Marcus's ally, but not quite Rebecca's friend either. Something between guilt and determination. She'd provided the smoking gun evidence of Marcus's offshore accounts and hidden transfers. Marcus entered with his legal team, projecting confidence despite the emergency nature of the hearing. He looked surprised to see Eleanor present, but his expression quickly shifted to calculated concern. Mom, you shouldn't be here. Your health. My health is my concern, Eleanor interrupted. Your theft is the court's concern. Judge Hawthorne reviewed the financial documents with growing displeasure. Bank transfers totaling over $2 million. Offshore accounts opened in the past 3 months. Property deeds quietly transferred to shell companies. Mr. Sterling, can you explain these transactions? Marcus's lead attorney tried to frame the transfers as legitimate business restructuring, but the timeline was damning. Every major transfer coincided with developments in the divorce proceedings. Furthermore, Catherine continued, Mr. Sterling has been planning this financial deception for months, while his wife provided unpaid caregiving for his mother. Eleanor asked to address the court again. The bailiff helped position her wheelchair near the witness stand. Your Honor, I want to read from my late husband's will, specifically the sections my son has apparently never reviewed. Eleanor's voice was weak but clear as she read the morality clauses James Sterling had included. The provisions about abandoning pregnant spouses, the requirements for caring for elderly parents, the automatic forfeiture of inheritance for demonstrating moral bankruptcy. Moreover, Eleanor continued, my husband included specific penalties for financial deception during family crises. Marcus's face went pale as Eleanor read clause after clause that directly addressed his current behavior. James Sterling had anticipated his son's character flaws with surgical precision. The inheritance my son believes he's protecting doesn't exist anymore, Eleanor concluded. He forfeited it the moment he abandoned his pregnant wife to pursue his affair. The courtroom fell silent except for the mechanical rhythm of Eleanor's oxygen concentrator. Marcus looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Your Honor, Margaret Chen tried to object. These allegations about inheritance are outside the scope of divorce proceedings. They're directly relevant to asset determination, Judge Hawthorne corrected. If Mr. Sterling has no legal claim to assets he's been hiding, this changes everything. Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. That will was written 20 years ago. The provisions are outdated. They can't be enforced. Eleanor smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. They can and they will. Your father updated the will 3 years ago, after your engagement to Rebecca. He wanted to ensure his daughter-in-law would be protected. Rebecca felt the baby move strongly, as if responding to the shift in courtroom energy. Everything was changing, and Marcus was finally facing consequences for his choices. "The court will order immediate asset preservation," Judge Hawthorne announced. "All offshore accounts frozen. All recent transfers reversed. Mr. Sterling, you're fortunate you're not facing criminal charges for fraud." After the hearing, Rebecca helped Eleanor back to the wheelchair, both women emotionally and physically drained. Victory felt different than Rebecca had expected. Not triumphant, but sad. The death of illusions was never completely joyful. Marcus approached them in the courthouse hallway, looking smaller than Rebecca remembered. "Mom, we can fix this. I made mistakes, but—" Eleanor looked at her son with eyes full of grief. "You didn't make mistakes, Marcus. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. I was confused. The stress of your illness, the pressure at work. Don't use my cancer as an excuse for your cruelty." Eleanor's words cut through Marcus's attempts at manipulation with surgical precision. "Can we try again?" Marcus asked, turning to Rebecca. "For the baby? We can start over." Rebecca studied her husband's face. Desperation, calculation, self-interest poorly disguised as remorse. No genuine love, no real understanding of what he'd destroyed. "No, Marcus, we can't." The word felt foreign in her mouth. For 5 years, she'd never said no to him directly, never refused his requests or demands, never prioritized her own needs over his convenience. But the baby will be fine, better than fine. The baby will be loved by people who understand what family really means. Marcus tried various approaches over the following weeks. Flowers, cards, promises of couples therapy, attempts to visit Eleanor in the hospital. Rebecca donated the flowers and threw away the cards. Eleanor refused to see him. "He doesn't understand," Eleanor said during one of their quiet afternoons together. "He thinks love is something you can negotiate back into existence." Rebecca was 37 weeks pregnant now, her body preparing for labor, while her life prepared for complete transformation. Victoria had become an unexpected ally, handling legal details while Rebecca focused on Eleanor's decline. "I know this is strange," Victoria said one afternoon, "but I want to help with the baby after she's born, if you'll let me." Rebecca considered this. The woman who'd helped destroy her marriage now wanted to help raise her child. Life's ironies were sometimes too complex for simple judgment. "Why?" "Because Eleanor showed me what real family looks like. I want to be part of something authentic for once." Eleanor, listening from her hospital bed, smiled weakly. Families aren't always built the traditional way. That evening, Eleanor made her final confession to Rebecca. "I should have stopped him sooner. I saw the signs when he was younger. The entitlement, the lack of empathy, the way he treated people when he thought no one was watching. You can't blame yourself for who he became. I enabled him, made excuses, thought love could change character." Eleanor's breathing was labored, but her words were clear. "I won't make that mistake with my grandchild." Rebecca understood. Eleanor was ensuring the next generation would be raised with different values. Love mixed with accountability, support combined with consequences. "Promise me," Eleanor whispered, "that you'll teach her about real strength, the kind that protects rather than dominates." Rebecca felt the baby move inside her, as if responding to her grandmother's words. "I promise." Eleanor died peacefully 3 days later, holding Rebecca's hand while Victoria kept vigil on the other side of the bed. Her last words were about love being action, not just feeling. The funeral was standing room only. Nurses from the cancer ward, neighbors Rebecca barely knew, business associates who'd respected Eleanor's integrity for decades. Marcus attended, looking lost and smaller than anyone remembered. After the service, he approached Rebecca one final time. "She left you everything," he said quietly. "She left us both everything, Marcus. You chose to reject it." Marcus looked at her growing belly, then at Victoria standing supportively beside her. "This isn't how I wanted things to end." "No," Rebecca agreed. "You wanted to have your affair and keep your family too. You wanted to abandon your responsibilities and maintain your inheritance. You wanted to be cruel without consequences." Marcus had no response to this simple truth. 6 weeks later, Eleanor Grace Mitchell was born during a spring thunderstorm. Rebecca labored for 14 hours with Victoria and her mother Diana providing support. No Marcus, no regrets. The baby was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and Eleanor's determined chin. Rebecca held her daughter and felt the final pieces of her old life fall away completely. She looks like her grandmother, Victoria said softly. She has her strength too, Rebecca replied. Outside the hospital window, the storm was clearing, leaving the world washed clean and ready for new growth. 3 months after Eleanor Grace's birth, Rebecca finally understood what her mother-in-law had been trying to teach her about the difference between love and fear. Holding her daughter during those quiet pre-dawn feedings, she realized Eleanor's greatest gift hadn't been financial security or legal protection. It had been permission to choose love over fear in every decision. The house felt different now. Not empty, despite Eleanor's absence, but peaceful. Rebecca had converted Eleanor's office into a nursery, surrounding baby Eleanor with the warmth and intelligence her grandmother had radiated. Victoria had kept her promise about helping. She arrived most mornings with coffee and competent hands, taking over baby care while Rebecca showered or napped. Their friendship was built on shared guilt and mutual redemption. Neither perfect, but both committed to doing better. She's going to be stubborn, Victoria observed, watching baby Eleanor refuse her bottle with impressive determination. Like her grandmother, Rebecca agreed. They'd never talked directly about the affair, about the destruction Victoria had helped cause. Some truths were better absorbed slowly, through actions rather than words. Victoria's presence during night feedings and diaper emergencies spoke louder than any apology. Marcus had attempted several reconciliation approaches. Gifts for the baby, cards expressing regret, offers of financial support that came with strings attached. Rebecca had learned to recognize manipulation disguised as generosity. He wants visitation rights, Catherine Mills reported during one of their legal updates. What kind of rights? Supervised visits. A few hours on weekends. He's claiming he wants to be part of his daughter's life. Rebecca looked at baby Eleanor, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet. This tiny person deserved protection from people who viewed love as a negotiating tool. No. Rebecca, the court might... Then we fight it. Eleanor left specific instructions about protecting this baby from toxic influences. Marcus forfeited parental rights when he tried to steal her before she was born. Catherine nodded approvingly. We can make that case. Your mother-in-law documented everything. Indeed, Eleanor had been thorough. Medical records showing Marcus's complete absence during Rebecca's pregnancy. Financial documents proving his attempts to hide assets. Personal letters describing her concerns about his character and its impact on child rearing. She thought of everything, Rebecca mused. She loved you both very much. Rebecca had started volunteering at the cancer center where Eleanor had received treatment. 2 mornings a week, she brought baby Eleanor to visit patients who were far from their own families. The baby's presence seemed to provide hope in a place that dealt primarily with uncertainty. You're Eleanor's girl, said Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman receiving her 3rd round of chemotherapy. She showed me your picture every week. Rebecca settled into the chair beside Mrs. Patterson's bed, baby Eleanor gurgling contentedly in her carrier. She talked about you too. She said you were the toughest fighter on the ward. Tough like her. Tough like you. Rebecca didn't feel tough most days. She felt like someone learning to live without the constant anticipation of criticism. Learning to make decisions without calculating their impact on someone else's ego. Learning to trust her own judgment. The hardest part, Mrs. Patterson continued, is figuring out who you are when you're not taking care of everyone else's needs. Rebecca understood exactly what she meant. For years, she'd defined herself through other people's requirements. Marcus's need for a supportive wife, Eleanor's need for a dedicated caregiver, her own mother's need for reassurance that Rebecca was happy. Who are you? Mrs. Patterson asked gently. Rebecca considered this while baby Eleanor made soft sleeping sounds. I'm learning. Victoria had surprised everyone by leaving corporate law to start her own practice specializing in family protection. She was representing 3 other women in divorce proceedings, complicated by hidden assets or emotional abuse. Eleanor changed my perspective, Victoria explained during one of their coffee conversations. I spent my career helping people take things from other people. Now I want to help people protect what matters. Rebecca watched Victoria hold baby Eleanor with increasing confidence. The transformation from homewrecker to family protector was ongoing, but authentic. Do you regret it? Rebecca asked. On the affair, I mean. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. I regret hurting you. I regret believing Marcus's lies about your marriage. I regret being the kind of person who thought love was something you could steal. She looked down at baby Eleanor, who was gripping Victoria's finger with determined strength. But if I hadn't done it, you might still be married to him. Still making yourself smaller to accommodate his ego. still believing his version of reality. Rebecca had considered this paradox many times. Victoria's betrayal had ultimately been the catalyst for Rebecca's liberation. Sometimes destruction cleared the way for better construction. Eleanor used to say that everything happens for a reason, Rebecca said. I think she meant that we can find reasons, create meaning, even from terrible things. Baby Eleanor woke up and immediately began crying, demonstrating the healthy lung capacity that had announced her arrival 3 months earlier. Rebecca lifted her daughter, feeling the solid weight of new life in her arms. What are you going to tell her about her father? Victoria asked. Rebecca had thought about this constantly. How to explain Marcus's absence without poisoning her daughter against him. How to be honest without being vindictive. I'm going to tell her that some people aren't capable of love, but that doesn't make them evil, just limited. And I'm going to make sure she knows the difference between love and control. Eleanor's inheritance had provided more than financial security. It had provided choices. Rebecca could afford to stay home with the baby. She could pursue education or career changes. She could travel or stay put. She could make decisions based on what felt right rather than what felt safe. Independence is terrifying when you're not used to it, Rebecca confided to Diana during one of her mother's weekly visits. But liberating too, Diana replied, holding her granddaughter with the expertise of someone who'd raised children under difficult circumstances. Diana had shared more stories about Rebecca's father in recent months. The gradual erosion of self-confidence, the questioning of her own perceptions, the relief mixed with terror when the marriage finally ended. The difference is, Diana continued, you have resources I didn't have: financial independence, legal protection, support systems, and Eleanor's wisdom. And Eleanor's wisdom, Diana agreed. Rebecca had framed one of Eleanor's final letters and hung it in the nursery. The handwriting was shaky from medication, but the message was clear. Love is not something you earn through perfect behavior. Love is something you give freely or not at all. Teach her this difference. Baby Eleanor would grow up understanding that love wasn't conditional on performance, that relationships required mutual respect, not constant accommodation, that strength could be gentle but should never be apologetic. She would have been an amazing grandmother, Rebecca said, looking at Eleanor's picture on the dresser. She still is, Victoria replied, just from a different place. The spring evening light filtered through the nursery windows, casting warm shadows across the room Eleanor had never seen finished, but had helped design through their conversations. Rebecca felt her mother-in-law's presence in every thoughtful detail. The prison door had been unlocked all along, Rebecca said aloud, repeating Eleanor's final wisdom. I'd been my own warden, but love gave me the key. Baby Eleanor made soft sounds of agreement or perhaps just contentment. Either way, Rebecca chose to interpret it as approval from the next generation. The cycle of accommodation and diminishment ended here. Love would begin again, built on a foundation of mutual respect and authentic connection. Outside, spring was emerging with the persistence of all growing things. Inside, a new family was learning what real love looked like. 1 year after Eleanor's death, Rebecca returned to the oncology ward as a volunteer. The same hallways where she'd received divorce papers now welcomed her as someone offering hope to other families in crisis. She pushed baby Eleanor's stroller through the familiar corridors, stopping to visit patients who remembered her mother-in-law. Eleanor Grace had inherited her grandmother's ability to brighten rooms simply by being present. You're Eleanor's girl, said the charge nurse, recognizing Rebecca immediately. She'd be so proud. Rebecca settled into the family lounge where she'd spent countless hours holding vigil. Today, she was here to support other caregivers who were navigating the impossible balance between hope and reality. A young woman sat alone in the corner, clutching a coffee cup with white knuckles. Rebecca recognized the expression, the particular exhaustion that came from loving someone who was dying while everyone else continued their normal lives. First treatment? Rebecca asked gently, settling into the chair beside her. The woman nodded. My mother, pancreatic cancer. They say 6 months, maybe less. I'm sorry, it's terrifying and overwhelming and impossibly sad. The woman looked surprised by Rebecca's direct acknowledgement. Most people offered platitudes about staying positive and fighting hard. Everyone keeps telling me to think positive thoughts, the woman said, as if optimism could cure cancer. Positive thoughts are nice, but practical support is better. Are you handling this alone? The woman's eyes filled with tears. My husband says I'm becoming obsessed with her care. He wants me to hire professionals so we can maintain our social schedule. Rebecca felt the familiar chill of recognition. the criticism disguised as concern, the isolation disguised as practical advice. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah, can I tell you something my mother-in-law taught me? There's a difference between obsession and devotion. Obsession is unhealthy. Devotion is love. Rebecca shared her story carefully, focusing on lessons rather than details. The importance of trusting intuition. The difference between supporting family and enabling selfishness. The reality that some people couldn't handle others' crises. How did you know? Sarah asked. When to stop trying to save your marriage? Rebecca looked down at baby Eleanor, who was charming an elderly patient with her toothless smile. When I realized I was shrinking myself to fit someone else's comfort zone. When I understood that real love doesn't require you to become smaller. They talked for an hour while baby Eleanor provided entertainment for patients and their families. Rebecca gave Sarah her phone number and the name of a support group for caregivers. Will it get easier? Sarah asked. No, Rebecca said honestly, but you'll get stronger, and you'll learn the difference between people who love you and people who need you to be convenient. After leaving the hospital, Rebecca stopped by Victoria's new office. The practice was thriving, built on referrals from women who'd escaped difficult situations with dignity intact. How was the hospital? Victoria asked, looking up from legal briefs. Helpful, for me and hopefully for a woman named Sarah, who's where I was a year ago. Victoria had changed in the months since Eleanor's death. The sharp edges of her corporate persona had softened into something more authentic. She was still fiercely intelligent and strategically minded, but now those skills served protection rather than acquisition. Any word from Marcus? Victoria asked. He sent a birthday card for Eleanor Grace, with a check attached. Rebecca had returned both items unopened. Money with strings attached wasn't support, it was attempted control. He's engaged, Victoria added quietly, to someone from his business network. Very young, very impressed by his success. Rebecca felt a flicker of sympathy for the unknown woman who was about to learn Marcus's true character. Then she remembered Eleanor's wisdom about not saving people from their own choices. I hope she's stronger than I was, Rebecca said simply. Baby Eleanor had begun babbling constantly, carrying on lengthy conversations with invisible companions. Rebecca liked to imagine she was talking to her grandmother, sharing the details of her expanding world. The house had been transformed from a place of tension into a haven of peace. Rebecca had redecorated slowly, replacing Marcus's preferences with her own choices. Bright colors instead of corporate neutrals, comfortable furniture instead of status symbols, family photos that actually reflected her family. Diana visited weekly, delighting in her granddaughter while sharing stories about Rebecca's childhood that helped explain her daughter's strength. You were always protecting things, Diana said, watching Rebecca comfort baby Eleanor after a vaccination. Injured birds, lost dogs, kids who were being bullied. Is that why I stayed with Marcus so long? Because I thought I could fix him? Maybe. But there's a difference between protecting something vulnerable and enabling something destructive. Eleanor Grace was crawling now, exploring her world with the fearless curiosity that had characterized her grandmother. Rebecca watched her daughter investigate everything within reach, marveling at the confidence of someone who'd never been told to make herself smaller. She's going to be formidable, Victoria observed during one of their evening visits. Like her grandmother, they'd created an unconventional family. Rebecca, baby Eleanor, Victoria, and Diana. 4 generations of women supporting each other through choice rather than obligation. Rebecca had started writing, not professionally, but therapeutically. Letters to Eleanor about her granddaughter's milestones, journal entries about learning to trust her own judgment, stories about the difference between love and accommodation. You should publish these, Victoria suggested after reading some of Rebecca's pieces. Other women need to hear this. Maybe someday, when Eleanor Grace is older and can understand why her mother's story might help other people. The anniversary of Eleanor's death arrived with spring rain and the scent of blooming flowers. Rebecca visited the grave with baby Eleanor, who immediately tried to eat the fresh tulips they'd brought. Your grandmother would have laughed at that, Rebecca told her daughter. She believed in embracing life completely, even the messy parts. Standing in the cemetery, Rebecca realized she'd achieved something Eleanor had wanted for her. Not just survival, but transformation. She was no longer the woman who'd made herself smaller to keep peace. She was someone who took up the space she deserved. A year later, Rebecca was invited to speak at a support group for women leaving difficult marriages. She stood in front of 20 women at various stages of recognizing their own worth, holding Eleanor Grace on her hip. I used to think love meant never saying no, Rebecca began. I thought being a good wife meant anticipating criticism and preventing it. I thought strength meant enduring rather than choosing. The women listened with the intensity of people hearing their own experiences reflected back to them. My mother-in-law taught me that love is action, not endurance, that real family protects its vulnerable members rather than exploiting them, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses. After her talk, women approached with their own stories, similar patterns of manipulation and self-doubt, similar struggles to distinguish between love and control. "How do you know when you're ready to leave?" asked a woman whose situation mirrored Rebecca's so closely it was startling. Rebecca considered this carefully. "When staying feels worse than the unknown. When you realize you're teaching your children that love looks like suffering." Eleanor Grace had started walking, toddling around the house with the determination of someone who'd inherited multiple generations of female strength. Rebecca watched her daughter navigate obstacles with problem-solving skills that suggested a bright future. "She won't accept limitations easily," Victoria observed, watching Eleanor Grace figure out how to reach a toy on a high shelf. "Good. The world will try to impose enough limitations on her. She doesn't need to impose them on herself." Rebecca's life had stabilized into routines that nurtured rather than depleted her. Morning walks with Eleanor Grace, volunteer work at the Cancer Center, evening conversations with Victoria, and weekend visits from Diana. The financial security Eleanor had provided allowed Rebecca to make choices based on fulfillment rather than survival. She'd enrolled in graduate courses in social work, planning to formalize her passion for helping families navigate medical crises. "You're building something meaningful," Victoria said during one of their evening conversations. "Eleanor would be proud. I'm building what she showed me was possible, a life based on authentic connection rather than obligation." Eleanor Grace had begun saying her first words, and Mama was quickly followed by Toria for Victoria. The little girl seemed to understand instinctively that families could be created through choice and commitment rather than just biology. Marcus had made one final attempt at reconciliation when Eleanor Grace turned 1. He'd appeared at the birthday party uninvited, bringing an expensive gift and rehearsed apologies. "She's beautiful," he'd said, looking at his daughter with something that might have been genuine emotion. "She looks like you." Rebecca had felt no anger, no residual attraction, no regret, just sadness for what he'd chosen to lose. "You can't be here, Marcus. You made your choice." "I made mistakes. I want to fix them." Rebecca had looked at Eleanor Grace, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. Diana reading stories with animated voices, Victoria teaching her to stack blocks, the oncology nurses who'd become honorary aunts. Some things can't be fixed, but new things can be built. Marcus had left the gift and departed without argument. Rebecca donated the expensive toy to the children's ward at the hospital where Eleanor had been treated. "He'll try again," Victoria had predicted. "Maybe, but I know who I am now. I know what real love looks like." Real love looked like Victoria arriving at 3 in the morning when Eleanor Grace had a fever, no questions asked. It looked like Diana rearranging her schedule to provide childcare when Rebecca had important meetings. It looked like the oncology staff checking on them months after their connection to the ward had ended. Real love was action without scorekeeping, support without conditions, presence without performance requirements. On quiet evenings, Rebecca would sit in the garden Eleanor had planted years ago, watching her daughter explore the world with fearless curiosity. The tulips Eleanor had loved bloomed each spring, a reminder that beauty could emerge from the darkest soil. "What would you tell her about her father?" Rebecca asked the empty air, as if Eleanor might answer from somewhere beyond the garden's borders. The wind rustled through the leaves, and Rebecca chose to interpret it as guidance. "Tell her the truth, but not with bitterness. Explain that some people aren't capable of the kind of love she deserves, but that doesn't make her less worthy of it." Eleanor Grace would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, and protected. She would understand that love didn't require perfection, but it did require respect. She would see examples of women supporting each other rather than competing for scraps of male attention. "The prison door had been unlocked all along," Rebecca said aloud, watching her daughter chase butterflies with joyful determination. "I'd been my own warden, but love gave me the key." Eleanor Grace looked up at her mother's voice and smiled, the expression so reminiscent of her grandmother that Rebecca felt tears of gratitude rather than loss. 2 years after Eleanor's death, Rebecca received a call from Sarah, the woman she'd met at the cancer center. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, "for showing me the difference between devotion and obsession, between love and control." Sarah had left her husband after he'd demanded she choose between caring for her dying mother and maintaining their social obligations. Like Rebecca, she discovered that losing someone who couldn't support her through crisis was actually a liberation. "My mother passed peacefully last month," Sarah continued. "I was holding her hand. She said she was proud of how strong I'd become." Rebecca understood exactly what Sarah meant. Sometimes the people we think we're losing are actually setting us free. The oncology ward had become Rebecca's second home, not as a patient's family member, but as someone who understood the particular challenges of loving people through terminal illness. She developed a support group for caregivers, teaching them to recognize the difference between healthy sacrifice and enabling manipulation. "The most important thing to remember," Rebecca told each new group, "is that crisis reveals character, both in the person who's sick and in the people around them. Some people rise to meet love's demands. Others use illness as an excuse to abandon responsibility." Eleanor Grace had inherited her grandmother's gift for bringing light into difficult spaces. At 2 years old, she charmed patients and staff alike, seeming to understand intuitively when someone needed a smile or a gentle touch. "She has healing energy," one of the nurses observed, "just like her grandmother." Rebecca watched her daughter distribute hugs and giggles throughout the cancer ward with the generosity of someone who'd never been taught to ration love. "She's learning that caring for people is normal," Rebecca explained to Victoria, "that families show up for each other, that love is something you do, not something you say." Victoria had become Eleanor Grace's chosen aunt, the person who remembered favorite snacks and special songs. Their bond was built on daily presence rather than biological connection. "Do you think she'll ask about Marcus when she's older?" Victoria wondered. "Yes, and I'll tell her the truth, that her father wasn't capable of the kind of love she deserves. But that doesn't mean she's unlovable. It means she's precious enough to protect from people who can't appreciate her value." Rebecca had learned to speak about Marcus without bitterness, presenting facts without emotional interpretation. Eleanor Grace would form her own opinions based on evidence rather than her mother's hurt. The house had been transformed into something Eleanor would have loved, bright with children's laughter, filled with friends who chose to be family, grounded in values that prioritized character over status. Rebecca kept Eleanor's portrait in the living room, not as a shrine but as a reminder, a representation of the kind of woman Eleanor Grace could become with the right guidance and protection. "Your grandmother saved us both," Rebecca would tell her daughter during their bedtime ritual. "She showed us what real love looks like." Eleanor Grace would fall asleep to stories about a brave woman who fought cancer and cruelty with equal determination, who protected her family even when it meant confronting her own son, who chose love over loyalty when the two conflicted. On the second anniversary of Eleanor's death, Rebecca spoke at a conference for women leaving abusive relationships. She stood before an audience of survivors, holding Eleanor Grace on her hip, representing the possibility of not just escape, but transformation. "I used to think strength meant enduring," Rebecca began. "I thought love meant never causing disappointment. I thought family meant accepting whatever treatment people chose to give me." The audience listened with the intensity of people hearing their own stories reflected back to them. "My mother-in-law taught me that real strength protects rather than endures, that real love has boundaries, that real family supports your growth rather than demanding your diminishment." After her speech, women approached with stories that mirrored her own experience. The gradual erosion of self-worth, the confusion between love and control, the terror and relief of finally choosing themselves. "How do you forgive yourself for staying so long?" asked a woman whose question reflected Rebecca's own long struggle with self-blame. Rebecca considered this carefully, remembering Eleanor's wisdom about guilt and growth. "You forgive yourself by understanding that you were doing the best you could with the information you had. You were trying to honor commitments, preserve families, be a good person. Those are admirable goals, even when applied to people who couldn't appreciate their value." Eleanor Grace had begun talking in full sentences, demonstrating the verbal skills of someone surrounded by adults who valued communication. Her favorite phrase was, "I do it myself," delivered with the determination of someone who'd inherited multiple generations of female independence. "She's going to be a force," Victoria observed, watching Eleanor Grace negotiate with a playground slide that was slightly too tall for her current abilities. "Like her grandmother," Rebecca agreed, "but with better boundaries." Rebecca had started dating, carefully and selectively, not because she needed a partner, but because she wanted to model healthy relationships for her daughter. She learned to recognize green flags as clearly as red ones: respect for her responsibilities, genuine interest in her thoughts, comfort with her independence. "You're different when you date from a position of strength," Diana observed during one of their weekly conversations. "I'm not looking for rescue anymore. I'm looking for partnership." The men who couldn't handle Rebecca's self-sufficiency eliminated themselves quickly. Those who remained understood that love meant addition, not absorption, that families could be enhanced by new members without being redefined by them. Eleanor Grace approved of Rebecca's approach, seeming to sense the difference between men who saw her as an obstacle and those who welcomed her as part of Rebecca's complete life. "She's a good judge of character," Victoria noted, like her grandmother. Indeed, Eleanor Grace had inherited Eleanor Sterling's ability to see through facades to authentic character. At 2 years old, she could distinguish between people who genuinely cared about her welfare and those who were performing kindness for adult approval. The oncology ward had hired Rebecca as a formal patient advocate, recognizing her unique ability to support families through medical and emotional crises. Her work combined professional training with personal experience, offering both practical resources and emotional understanding. "You have a gift for helping people find their strength," Dr. Coleman observed during one of their staff meetings. "I had good teachers," Rebecca replied, thinking of Eleanor's fierce protection and unwavering belief in Rebecca's capability. Each day brought new families facing impossible choices between competing loyalties. Rebecca helped them navigate the difference between healthy sacrifice and destructive accommodation, between supporting loved ones and enabling destructive behavior. "The most important question," Rebecca would tell new families, "is whether your sacrifices are building something positive or just preventing something negative. Love should create growth, not just avoid conflict." Eleanor Grace had started asking about the pictures of Grandma Eleanor throughout their house. Rebecca shared stories carefully, focusing on Eleanor's strength, wisdom, and love rather than the tragedy of her illness. "Grandma Eleanor fought hard to protect our family," Rebecca would explain. "She made sure you would be safe and loved." "Did she fight bad guys?" Eleanor Grace asked with the literalism of a 2-year-old. "She fought people who wanted to hurt our family, and she won." This was true in every way that mattered. Eleanor Sterling had protected Rebecca and her granddaughter from a man who would have damaged them both. She'd ensured their financial security and emotional freedom. She'd modeled the kind of love worth fighting for. 3 years after Eleanor's death, Rebecca published a small book about caregiving during family crisis. The dedication read, "For Eleanor Sterling, who taught me that love is action, not endurance, and for Eleanor Grace, who will grow up knowing the difference." The book combined practical advice with emotional wisdom, helping other caregivers recognize when their sacrifice was being exploited rather than appreciated. It became a resource for hospitals and support groups across the country. "Eleanor would be so proud," Victoria said, reading reviews from families who'd found guidance in Rebecca's words. "She knew I had something to offer the world. She just had to help me see it." Rebecca's life had stabilized into purposeful patterns: work that mattered, relationships based on mutual respect, a daughter who was growing up secure in her worth and clear about her boundaries. Marcus had remarried and moved across the country, apparently learning from his mistakes enough to avoid repeating his most destructive patterns. Rebecca felt no animosity toward his new wife, only hope that he'd grown enough to treat her better. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Eleanor hadn't gotten sick?" Victoria asked during one of their evening conversations. Rebecca considered this hypothetical carefully. "I think I would have stayed trapped much longer. Her illness forced truth to the surface. It showed me what real love looked like and what authentic support felt like." Eleanor Grace had started preschool, thriving in an environment that encouraged independence and creativity. Her teachers noted her unusual empathy for other children and her natural leadership abilities. "She's going to change the world," one teacher predicted. "She already has," Rebecca replied, thinking of how her daughter's presence had transformed their small circle of chosen family into something beautiful and strong. The garden Eleanor had planted continued to bloom each spring, now expanded by Rebecca and Eleanor Grace's annual additions. 3 generations of women's care had created something lovely and lasting. On quiet mornings, Rebecca would sit in the garden with her coffee, watching Eleanor Grace explore the world with fearless curiosity. The child who'd been fought for before she was born was growing into someone who knew her own value. The prison door had been unlocked all along, Rebecca said to the morning air, repeating Eleanor's final wisdom. I'd been my own warden, but love gave me the key. Eleanor Grace looked up from her examination of a butterfly and smiled, the expression so reminiscent of her grandmother that Rebecca felt the continuing presence of the woman who'd saved them both. Love, Rebecca had learned, wasn't something you earned through perfect behavior. Love was something you gave freely and received gratefully. Love was action without scorekeeping. Love was presence without performance requirements. And sometimes love meant fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Just as Eleanor Sterling had fought for Rebecca and her unborn granddaughter, just as Rebecca now fought for families facing their own impossible choices. The story that began with divorce papers served during chemotherapy had become something Eleanor Sterling would have been proud to claim. Not a tale of victimhood, but a narrative of transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning built on the foundation of authentic love. Eleanor Grace would grow up knowing that families were created through choice and sustained through commitment. That love was measured by action, not words. That strength could be gentle, but should never be apologetic. The legacy Eleanor Sterling had fought to preserve lived on in the garden she'd planted, the wisdom she'd shared, and the granddaughter who bore her name. Love had won, as Eleanor always knew it would, but only because someone had been brave enough to fight for it. In the end, the CEO who'd forced his cancer-stricken mother to witness his cruelty had lost everything that mattered. His mother's respect, his wife's love, his daughter's presence, his father's inheritance. But the pregnant wife who'd been his mother's only caregiver had gained everything that lasted. Authentic relationships, financial independence, professional purpose, a daughter who knew her worth. The circle was complete, but the story continued. Love, real love, always does.